All right, let's dive deep into Tibetan Buddhism today with, you guessed it, the Dalai Lama himself. You sent over two amazing audio recordings.
Oh, yeah.
One where he breaks down the 8 verses for training the mind, and another a Q&A session,
Right. A whole bunch of topics.
hitting a bunch of different topics. What's so cool about this, at least for me, is that we get to hear his teachings straight from the source, you know?
Yeah.
It makes his warmth and humor so much more apparent. I think that's so crucial
Yeah.
to understanding how he approaches these complex ideas.
Absolutely. I think that's really special. You get to hear it, hear his voice, and get to kind of feel the context in which he's speaking a little bit more.
Yeah, it makes the teaching so much more accessible. So let's jump right into those 8 verses.
Okay.
Obviously, we won't list them all out, but the thing that I found so fascinating was how the Dalai Lama takes these verses beyond abstract philosophy and shows us how they're actually practical tools
Hmm.
for navigating everyday life.
Yeah. He really emphasizes that it's all about training the mind, right? We're talking about cultivating compassion and wisdom and inner strength.
Mhm.
These are qualities that anyone can develop, whether or not you're a Buddhist.
Right. So it's not about religious dogma, but about, like, universal human qualities.
Yeah.
And he gets into that right away in the first verse, where he compares wise, selfish people to foolish, selfish people. Okay, I'll bite. What's the difference?
Well, it's a clever way to think about it.
Yeah.
He explains that wise, selfish people recognize that helping others
Mm-hmm.
is actually the key to their own happiness.
Okay.
It's not about denying your own needs, but it's realizing that, true fulfillment comes from
Right.
contributing to the well-being of others.
So it's like that idea of enlightened self-interest.
Yeah.
You take care of yourself by taking care of others.
Hmm.
Makes sense. But what about those foolish, selfish people?
Well, the foolish, selfish people, they're the ones constantly chasing those short-lived pleasures.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
They think that grabbing whatever they can get will lead to happiness.
Yeah.
But it actually leaves them feeling empty and dissatisfied in the long run.
Right. It
Yeah.
makes me think of those studies that show people who volunteer
Right.
or donate to charity report higher levels of happiness.
Yeah.
There's something about giving that seems to nourish us on a deeper level.
Exactly. And the Dalai Lama isn't just like theorizing here.
Right.
He actually uses the example of parents caring for their children
Oh.
as like a perfect illustration of wise selfishness. Parents naturally want their children to be happy and healthy.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they find their own happiness.
Okay. Now, the second verse is where things get a bit more challenging.
Okay.
He suggests that we should see ourselves as lower than others.
Yeah.
At first glance, that sounds a bit, well, harsh.
Yeah.
Is he saying we should put ourselves down?
Not at all. It's not about self-deprecation. It's actually a technique for cultivating humility and reverence.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that every single person deserves respect and kindness, no matter their social status or achievements.
So it's about shifting our perspective, not diminishing our self-worth.
Yeah.
By seeing ourselves as equal to or even lower than others, it makes it easier to restrain those negative actions that come from
Right.
arrogance and ego.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that actually leads beautifully into the third verse, where he identifies our true inner enemy. It's not some external force,
Okay.
but our own mental and emotional defilements.
So we're talking about things like anger, jealousy, attachment.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of
He
stuff.
says these are the real battles we need to fight.
Okay.
And mindfulness is our weapon of choice.
Right.
Recognizing these negative states the moment they pop up is crucial
Yeah.
to preventing them from taking over and causing harm.
It's like catching a spark
Yeah.
before it turns into a raging fire.
Exactly.
So we need to be vigilant firefighters of our own minds.
Yes, exactly.
Love it. And this brings us to the fourth verse,
Okay.
which is all about compassion,
Yeah.
even and perhaps especially for those who are difficult to deal with.
I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, I think so. So, I mean, the Dalai Lama is saying that these negative disposition folks are actually our most valuable teachers of patience.
Think about it. Who else pushes our buttons
Yeah.
and forces us to confront our own reactions?
Yeah.
So direct.
So instead of getting frustrated or angry, we should try to see them as opportunities for growth.
Exactly.
Okay.
He even goes so far as to call them precious
Okay.
because they provide us with a chance to practice what we learned in those first 3 verses.
Yeah.
We can choose to respond with compassion rather than react with negativity.
That's a radical shift in perspective.
It is. And the 5th verse, this might raise some eyebrows.
Okay.
He advises that when others treat us unfairly, We should accept defeat and offer them victory.
Okay, now I'm confused. Is he suggesting we just roll over and let people walk all over us?
Not quite.
No.
He clarifies that this applies specifically to situations where, like, the harm is limited to yourself and it doesn't have broader consequences. It's about choosing to not fuel the fire of conflict with our own anger and resentment.
So it's about picking inner peace over escalating a situation.
Yeah.
Especially when it's not going to serve any real purpose.
Yeah.
I can see the wisdom in that. And this ties into the 6th verse beautifully, where he takes forgiveness to a whole new level.
He does, yeah. He says that even if someone you've helped betrays you,
Okay.
you should still view them as a sacred friend.
Wow, that's a tough one to swallow.
Yeah.
How can we possibly see someone who's hurt us in that light?
He explains that this person is actually giving you an incredible gift. It's the opportunity to practice patience,
Right.
which is essential on the path to spiritual growth. So instead of being consumed by like anger or disappointment, we can use those difficult experiences to cultivate compassion
Right.
and understanding.
So it's about recognizing that every interaction, even the painful ones, can be a chance to learn and evolve. This is definitely making me rethink how I approach difficult people in my own life.
That's the power of these teachings, right? They challenge us to look at things from a different perspective. Now, are you ready to dive into some advanced territory?
I think so. Bring it on.
Right. The 7th verse is all about Tonglen.
Konglin.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is. It is. It's the practice of giving and taking.
Okay.
Where you visualize taking on the suffering of others and giving them your own joy and happiness.
So not exactly for beginners then.
Well, the Dalai Lama definitely emphasizes that Tonglen is an advanced practice that requires courage and a deep level of commitment.
Okay.
It's about actively cultivating compassion and empathy. And he even uses the word secretly, implying that this is something to be practiced with humility, not for, recognition or praise.
Right. It reminds us that real spiritual growth isn't about outward appearances. It's about the inner work we do.
Exactly.
All right. So what about the 8th and final verse? How does it all come together?
The 8th verse is a powerful reminder of what can derail us on this path. It's about recognizing the 8 mundane concerns.
Ah, yes.
Like seeking praise and avoiding blame, worrying about gain and loss.
The classic ego traps.
Exactly. And to break free from these traps, he says it's essential to grasp the concept of emptiness.
Okay, now this is where my brain starts to hurt a little. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so in Buddhism, emptiness doesn't mean that things don't exist.
Yeah.
It's more about understanding that things don't exist independently,
Right.
but rather in relation to everything else. So think of it like a cosmic web where everything is interconnected.
So it's about understanding the inherent interconnectedness of all things.
Exactly. And when we can really grasp this, he explains that it helps us detach from those fleeting desires and aversions that cause so much suffering. It allows us to experience a deeper level of freedom and peace.
Wow, just 8 verses and we've already covered so much ground.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama packs a lot of wisdom into these teachings.
Yeah.
But we're just scratching the surface here.
Right.
To truly appreciate the depth and nuance of his message, I highly recommend listening to the full recording.
Definitely. And speaking of nuance, you also sent over this Q&A session recording where he fields a wide range of questions from the audience. I'm curious to see how he applies these teachings to real-world scenarios.
Well, I think you'll find his answers just as insightful and thought-provoking as his commentary on the 8 verses.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit more humorous, too.
Let's dive in. I'm especially interested to hear what he has to say about dealing with negative emotions.
Yeah.
That's something we all struggle with.
Yeah, it's universal.
Right.
And he offers a practical 3-pronged approach.
Okay.
First, he says we need to recognize how destructive negative emotions really are.
So acknowledge the damage they can cause to ourselves and others.
Right. Second, he encourages us to examine the underlying reasons for these emotions, which often involve projections and distorted perceptions.
Just like he's saying, don't just react.
Yeah.
Investigate. Understand where these feelings are coming from.
Exactly. And finally, when those emotions are already running high, he suggests trying to shift your attention to something else.
Classic mindfulness technique.
Exactly.
Break the cycle. Shift your focus.
Exactly. It can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths or going for a walk.
Right.
Anything that helps you create a little distance from the intensity of the emotion.
Solid advice. Now, this next question is particularly fascinating to me. It's about animal sentience.
Okay.
I know the Dalai Lama is a strong advocate for animal welfare, so I'm curious to hear his perspective.
Yes, he's very clear on this point.
Okay.
He reiterates the Buddhist view that all sentient beings are equal in their desire for happiness and their aversion to suffering.
So no species hierarchy.
None. But he does point out that humans have a greater capacity
Yeah.
for analysis and understanding due to our, more complex brains.
Yeah. So we have a greater responsibility to use that capacity wisely and compassionately.
Precisely. Now, another question that came up was about his
Yeah.
recommended meditation practice for, everyday people.
Okay.
Those of us who aren't monks
Right.
living in monasteries.
Right. I'm all ears. What's the secret?
Well, his answer is refreshingly straightforward.
Okay.
He emphasizes that the core Buddhist path is the same for everyone, whether you're, a monk in robes or someone living a typical modern life.
So no shortcuts for us lay people.
Nope. He stresses the importance of study
Okay.
and analytical meditation, especially for those just starting out.
So it's not about just chanting mantras or doing elaborate rituals.
It's about understanding the why behind the practice.
Right.
He wants us to use our intellects to grasp the teachings and then integrate them into our experience through contemplation and reflection.
Okay, so here's a question I bet a lot of people were wondering about.
Okay.
How to deal with those catastrophic world events.
Yeah.
The ones that seem to be happening more and more these days.
Yeah. It's a heavy topic, but his response is surprisingly practical.
Okay.
He says, if you can relocate to a safer place, do it.
Right.
But if that's not possible, then focus on preparing for your next life.
It's a stark reminder that we don't have control over everything, but we can control how we prepare for the future, both in this life and beyond. Now, this next question is where science and spirituality collide.
Okay.
Someone asked about the Big Bang Theory and how it relates to Buddhist cosmology.
Ooh, this is where things get really interesting. He acknowledges that the idea of a single Big Bang as the absolute beginning of the universe, challenges traditional Buddhist views on time and karma.
So a potential clash of worldviews?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
But then he throws in a fascinating twist.
Okay.
He points out that if there were multiple Big Bangs, as some physicists theorize, then it wouldn't necessarily contradict Buddhist cosmology.
So it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging the complexity. Yeah.
And exploring potential points of convergence.
Exactly. And what I find so compelling is his willingness to engage with scientific ideas and explore their compatibility with Buddhist teachings.
He's not afraid to ask questions and challenge his own assumptions.
Right.
Okay. Last but not least, someone asked the age-old question, is total happiness and harmony even possible?
The quest for lasting happiness.
Yeah.
His answer distinguishes between, the fleeting pleasure we often mistake for happiness and the genuine Buddhist understanding of happiness, which transcends feelings and involves freedom from suffering.
So it's a deeper, more enduring kind of peace.
Yeah.
Not reliant on external circumstances.
Exactly. It's not about chasing highs and avoiding lows, but about cultivating inner peace and equanimity.
This Q&A really showcases his ability to tackle these complex questions with wisdom and humor and a deep understanding of the human experience.
He seamlessly blends profound philosophical concepts
with practical advice, making these ancient teachings relevant to our modern lives.
And he does it with such warmth and genuine compassion.
He does, yeah.
That you can't help but feel inspired.
Absolutely. What strikes me the most is how he consistently emphasizes the importance of compassion and kindness in all aspects of life. It's clearly the foundation of his teachings, and it just shines through in everything he says.
Well, I don't know about you, but my brain is officially full.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground in this first part of our deep dive, but there's still so much more to explore in this fascinating Q&A session. We'll be back soon to continue unpacking the wisdom of the Dalai Lama.
Sounds good. Welcome back. I'm eager to continue exploring this insightful Q&A with you.
Me too. We just scratched the surface of his wisdom in that last segment, and I'm ready for more.
Well, prepare to be fascinated, because he doesn't shy away from tackling some really challenging questions head on.
That's what I love about his approach. He blends ancient wisdom with such a practical, down-to-earth perspective.
Right. You're right. It's that grounded approach that makes his teaching so relevant.
Exactly. For instance, I was particularly struck by his response to a question about how to deal with someone who's wronged you, but the harm is limited to yourself. It
Yeah,
felt like a direct application of that accept defeat concept from the 8 verses.
you've hit the nail on the head. He
Yeah.
delves deeper into that principle, emphasizing that it's not about being passive or letting people walk all over you.
Right.
It's about recognizing that reacting with anger or resentment ultimately hurts you more than the person who wronged you.
Right. It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You're the one who suffers most.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he even suggests viewing the person who wronged you as a teacher of patience. It's a radical idea, isn't it?
It is.
Seeing the person who caused you pain as someone who's helping you grow.
It is, but it's also incredibly powerful. It shifts the focus from blame and resentment to personal growth and inner peace.
And this theme of perspective really runs throughout the entire Q&A. He talks about how our perceptions shape our reality, particularly when it comes to those pesky negative emotions.
Yeah, he brought up the idea of projections, right? How we often project our own insecurities and fears onto others.
Yes. He explains that many of our negative feelings stem from these projections. We're not seeing people as they are, but through the lens of our own baggage.
Right, it's like we're wearing distorted glasses
Yeah.
that color everything we see.
A perfect analogy. And he encourages us to examine the root of our negative emotions, to question those assumptions, and cultivate a more balanced and realistic view of ourselves and the people around us.
It's about taking responsibility for our own emotional well-being rather than blaming others for how we feel.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can lead to a more peaceful and harmonious life.
Absolutely. It's not about denying difficult emotions, but about understanding where they come from and choosing how we respond to them.
Now, another key takeaway that resonated with me was his emphasis on the intention behind our actions.
You're referring to his discussion of Tonglen, the giving and taking meditation, right?
Yes. He makes it clear that Tonglen is not just about visualization.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a genuine motivation of compassion, a sincere desire to ease the suffering of others.
So it's not a mental exercise, but a heart-centered practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And he extends this idea of intention to all our actions. He cautions that even seemingly good deeds can be tainted by ego if our motives are impure.
So it's important to check ourselves to ask, why am I doing this?
Exactly. Are we seeking recognition, or are we acting from a place of genuine care and concern for others?
Right.
He urges us to cultivate a sense of humility and integrity.
This is where that Buddhist principle of selflessness really shines through.
It does. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings and acting with compassion and wisdom for the benefit of everyone.
It's a beautiful and inspiring way to live.
And you know, one thing that makes his teaching so approachable is his sense of humor. He's not afraid to poke fun at himself, which makes these complex ideas feel less intimidating.
Totally. He even joked about computers humbling him whenever he feels a bit of pride creeping in.
Right. It's a great reminder that even spiritual masters are human beings navigating the ups and downs of life with humor and humility.
I love that.
Yeah.
It makes him so relatable. And speaking of the journey, he emphasizes that the Buddhist path is all about continuous learning and growth.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't claim to have all the answers.
Wow.
Instead, he encourages us to question, explore, and find our own understanding of the teachings.
Yeah, and he stresses the importance of actually applying these teachings to our lives,
Right.
not just understanding them intellectually.
It's about integrating them into our everyday experiences through reflection and mindful action.
Right.
This active approach is what makes Buddhism feel so vibrant and relevant even thousands of years after its origins.
Now, as we delve deeper into the Q&A, we encounter some fascinating questions that explore the intersection of Buddhism and science.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
Right.
He's open to engaging with modern scientific discoveries, even when they seem to challenge traditional Buddhist thought.
Right. His approach is so refreshing. He doesn't shy away from tough questions like the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah. He acknowledges that the idea of a single Big Bang as the absolute beginning of the universe poses a challenge to Buddhist cosmology, which views time as beginningless.
But instead of dismissing it outright, he explores different possibilities. He suggests that if there were multiple Big Bangs, it wouldn't necessarily contradict Buddhist teachings.
Okay.
He also points out that the Big Bang Theory doesn't address the question of consciousness, which is central to Buddhist thought.
So it's not about choosing science over spirituality or vice versa. It's about recognizing the limitations of each perspective and engaging in open-minded dialogue.
Exactly. And his willingness to consider these different viewpoints is a testament to his intellectual curiosity and humility.
Right. He's clearly not afraid to adapt and evolve his understanding.
Now, another question that touched on this theme of different perspectives was about how Buddhism views deities from other religions.
That's such an important topic, especially in our increasingly interconnected world.
It is. And his response is one of inclusivity and respect. He emphasizes that Buddhism honors all religions and recognizes the value of their teachings.
So it's not about claiming one belief system is superior to another, but about finding common ground and fostering harmony.
He explains that while Buddhists don't believe in a creator god in the traditional sense,
Right.
they do acknowledge the existence of various realms of beings, some of whom might be considered deities in other religions.
So it's about understanding these different belief systems within the framework of Buddhist teachings.
Exactly. He emphasizes that the ultimate aim of all spiritual traditions is to cultivate compassion, wisdom, and liberation from suffering.
Right.
It's a message of unity and understanding that resonates deeply.
It's a reminder that we have more in common than we often realize.
Now, another thread that runs throughout this Q&A is the importance of ethics in our daily lives.
He touched on this when discussing the Buddhist precepts, which are essentially guidelines for ethical conduct.
Right. He emphasizes that these precepts aren't just rigid rules to follow blindly.
Right.
They're expressions of compassion and wisdom intended to help us live in harmony with ourselves and everyone around us.
He talked about how even small acts of kindness and generosity can have a ripple effect, creating positive change in the world.
Exactly. It's a recognizing our interconnectedness
Yeah.
and acting responsibly for the benefit of all.
This is such a powerful message, especially given the challenges our world is facing.
Yeah.
We need collective action and a shared sense of responsibility more than ever.
Absolutely. And he reminds us that our actions have consequences both for ourselves and others.
Right.
It's a call to live consciously and compassionately, making choices that contribute to a more just and harmonious world.
And what's so inspiring is that he embodies these teachings in his own life.
He's a living example of compassion, wisdom, and peace in action.
His words aren't just empty rhetoric. They're backed by a lifetime of practice and a genuine commitment to alleviating suffering.
Right. His presence is like a beacon of hope, reminding us that even in the face of immense challenges, we have the capacity for extraordinary kindness and transformation.
It's truly inspiring.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yep.
I want to leave you with a question to ponder. How can we take his teachings and integrate them into our own lives, even in small ways, to create positive change? It's a question worth reflecting on.
It is, and we'll be back soon to continue exploring these profound and inspiring teachings in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the teachings of Dalai Lama. You know, it feels like we've been on this incredible journey,
Yeah.
exploring the 8 verses,
Mhm.
delving into that fascinating Q&A.
It's been quite the exploration, hasn't it?
It really has.
And, there's one overarching theme that stands out to me. It's his emphasis on putting these teachings into practice.
Yeah. It's not enough to just intellectually grasp the concepts.
Right.
He really pushes us to integrate them into our daily lives, to actually embody these qualities of compassion
Yeah.
and wisdom.
Mhm.
You know, true transformation occurs not just during meditation, but in how we navigate our relationships, respond to challenges,
Right.
and, make choices throughout our day.
Mhm.
I love that. But I have to admit, sometimes it feels daunting.
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually bridge that gap between theory and practice? How do we take these profound teachings and make them a living reality in our messy, complicated lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while there's no single answer, he offers some really helpful guidance.
Yeah.
He encourages us to start small,
Okay.
focus on cultivating simple habits of kindness, compassion, and mindfulness in those everyday moments.
So it's not about becoming a monk or retreating to a cave in the Himalayas.
Right.
It's about bringing these qualities into the nitty-gritty of our daily routines.
Exactly. It could be as simple as practicing patience when you're stuck in traffic.
Right.
Or offering a genuine compliment to a coworker.
Yeah.
Or even just taking a few minutes to, appreciate the beauty of a sunset.
Right. It's about those micro moments of mindfulness that can shift our perspective and create a ripple effect of positivity.
He also encourages us to pause and reflect on our motivations.
Yeah.
Why are we doing what we're doing? Are we acting out of genuine care for others? Or are we seeking recognition and praise?
It's about checking in with ourselves, making sure our actions are aligned with our values.
Exactly, because even seemingly selfless acts can be tainted by ego if our intentions aren't pure.
Hmm.
He reminds us that true happiness and fulfillment don't come from external achievements, but from inner peace and a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves.
This reminds me of that concept of emptiness we discussed earlier. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, understanding that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
You've made a beautiful connection there. By cultivating compassion and acting for the benefit of others,
Right.
we're actually contributing to our own happiness and fulfillment as well.
Right. It's a win-win situation. It's not about self-sacrifice. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
And that brings us back to something he said at the very beginning of his teaching on the 8 verses.
Yeah.
Do you remember his distinction between wise, selfish people
Yeah.
and foolish, selfish people?
Of course. That was such a clever way to illustrate how true happiness comes from helping others.
He explained that wise, selfish people understand that their own well-being
Right.
is ultimately dependent on the well-being of others.
So they act with compassion and generosity, knowing that it actually benefits them in the long run.
While foolish, selfish people chase after fleeting pleasures and material possessions,
Right.
only to find themselves feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that true happiness is not a zero-sum game. We can all win
Exactly.
by choosing kindness and compassion.
And it's not about, like, grand gestures or heroic acts. It's about those small,
Right.
everyday choices that create a ripple effect of positivity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to invite our listener to reflect on how they can embody the wisdom of the Dalai Lama in their own life. What small acts of kindness or compassion can you weave into your day?
Maybe it's offering a helping hand to someone in need, or practicing patience in a frustrating situation,
Yeah.
or simply taking a moment to appreciate the beauty around you.
Because even the smallest gestures can make a difference. Remember, as he teaches, true happiness comes from making a positive impact on the world.
What a beautiful and inspiring message to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of Tibetan Buddhism.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.